The stories you are about to hear are entirely true. They are some of history's most notorious and sinister mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual witnesses and police involved have participated in the recreation of these events. Your hosts, senior mystery analysts Ben Patesky and John Nafziger, have been investigating the unknown and solving the world's greatest riddles for over a year. They work tirelessly for your own good, exploring the dark in order to bring the truth to light. This is Drunk Mysteries.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Drunk Mysteries. I am your host, John Nafziger, with my co-host, Ben Patesky. Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, John. And John, I would just like to give a second to reach out to our listeners. Now, as we drink for you and get drunker while talking about mysteries, the only way that we are going to grow as a podcast is if you subscribe and review. And it doesn't even have to be a good review. It doesn't have to be more than 1 star, although 5 stars or 2 stars even would be appreciated. You don't even have to write a sentence. All you have to do is you can give like a punctuation, like a period or something.
As I've said before, write the word hand job. It's fine.
Yeah, hand job.
Anyway, it's a huge thing. So, what are we drinking? That's kind of what we like to talk about next. We're actually having 2 Irish coffees, as we like to start off a lot of our drunk mystery sessions.
It keeps your brain on point, and it also gets you buzzed, as we promised to do during each and every one of the show.
A lot of investigations take a lot of twists and turns. A lot of mysteries have a lot of ins and outs.
And we need caffeine to keep awake.
100%. So, now Ben, go ahead. Why don't you give us the overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight? This is a big episode.
So tonight, what we are going to be talking about is what most people refer to as the granddaddy of UFO sightings. We are, of course, speaking of what is infamously known as, among Air Force officials, as the Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting. It is widely considered the most significant and most controversial UFO sighting of the modern age. It occurred some 60 years ago when a private pilot, an extremely successful businessman by the name of Kenneth Arnold.
Handsome.
Maybe not.
Probably.
We don't know. But he claimed that he saw a string of 9 shiny, unidentified flying objects over Washington State. Now, he had the wherewithal, because, again, he was a highly competent pilot and businessman, to take detailed notes of what these objects were doing and exactly their location and exactly how fast they were going. Overview. So, basically, Kenneth Arnold's sighting of these objects led to one of the largest Air Force investigations of UFOs, actually the largest investigation of UFOs by the government in U.S. history, and remains highly classified. And tonight we are here to dig into this mystery while drinking a fuck ton of booze and figuring out what happened. And by the way, I just want to mention real quick.
Go ahead.
We are, in addition to drinking Jameson inside of Irish coffee, we're also drinking New Belgium Two-Hearted Ale American IPA.
That one's actually by Bell's Brewing Company.
Oh no, it's not
We're
New
drinking
Belgium.
kind of a mixture.
It's not New Belgium. I fucked up. It's not New Belgium. I thought it was, but we're drinking Bell's beer. It's brewed in Comstock, Michigan, and it's Two-Hearted Ale. It's an American IPA. Are we sponsored by anyone we mentioned?
No.
And
Not
do we
yet.
want to be?
Yes.
Yeah,
I do,
we do. We
Don't
would love
give
to
me a
make money
on
doing
that.
that.
All right.
But anyway, John, let's dive right into this.
Yeah, exactly.
We, of
So
course, have
look,
the granddaddy.
the whole story begins and ultimately sort of ends with Kenneth Arnold. And what we're going to establish first is, can he be
Who was
trusted?
he? Who was Kenneth Arnold? John, dig into this.
Kenneth Arnold was born in Seneca, Minnesota on March 29th, 1915, but he actually ended up growing up in Scobie, Montana for reasons unknown. He attended the University of Iowa, where he was an avid swimmer and diver, being good enough at the latter to actually try out for the U.S. diving team.
Wow.
Arnold began Great Western Fire Control. He began a
business called Great Western Fire Control.
Right, okay. So he began the business called Great Western Fire Control Supply in Boise, Idaho in 1940. So,
did not serve in World War II.
Yeah, didn't do it. A company, the company sold and installed fire suppression systems, in business places, homes. The job took him around the Pacific Northwest. He was regarded as a skilled and experienced pilot with over 9,000 hours of total flight time, almost half of which were devoted to search and rescue missions.
Okay, so John, what we have here is we have what appears to be a highly competent and professional business person who also can fly a plane. Like,
Agreed.
he's got a lot of skills that are important. So we're going to dive right into this. So Kenneth Arnold, after 7 years in his own business, on June 24th, 1947, he was flying on a business jet from Chehalis, Washington to Yakima, Washington in his beloved Call Air A2 airplane. He was on a business trip, as I said. So he's on his flight on this business trip when suddenly he receives a call, and he learns that a $5,000 reward is in place for the discovery of a U.S. Marine Corps transport of a C-46 airplane that had crashed near Mount Rainier on a routine training mission.
So he's like, all right, I'm going to make some money.
Yeah, and the skies were completely clear, so he decides to investigate. So a few minutes later, minutes after hearing this, it's 3 p.m., and he is flying at about 9,200 feet in his. And by the way, his Call Air 2 is a propeller plane, so he can do stuff like roll down the windows. And he's flying at just under 10,000 feet. He's near the city of Mineral, Washington, and he's searching around, and eventually he gives up the search because he realizes that he doesn't have enough gas to do this and go on his business trip. So he turns around and heads towards Yakima, Washington, his original destination. Suddenly, Kenneth Arnold sees
out of nowhere.
He sees a bright flashing light, similar to sunlight reflecting from one of his rearview mirrors. He immediately turns around because he is naturally worried that he might be dangerously close to another airplane, which is what that usually means. Like he thinks he sees the glint of another airplane.
Holy shit.
So Arnold turns around, he scans the skies around him, but all he could see was just a regular other commercial airplane to his left and about 50 miles behind him. So he's like, okay, I must have just fucking imagined something.
Yeah.
And then about 30 seconds later, after seeing that flash of light, Arnold sees something quite peculiar. He sees a series of bright flashes in the distance and off to his left. He's right near a mountain, Mount Rainier, a very famous mountain in Washington. And these light flashes are just to the north of Mount Rainier. So he's a relatively reasonable guy. He assumes that these might be reflections off of his own airplane windows, but he's good at math, so he does a few quick calculations, and this involves rocking his plane side to side, removing his eyeglasses, and then eventually
manipulating the angle of the light. Yeah,
exactly. Rolling down and then eventually he rolls down his window altogether, and this rules out that it's just random light coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, reflections.
So the reflections he determines are coming from flying objects. And he also notices that these flying objects are flying in a long chain, and Arnold for a moment considered that these might be a flock of geese. But he soon realized that it can't be a flock of geese for a number of reasons, including that they're up 10,000 feet, which is way too high for a flock of geese. They have a bright glint coming off of them, which geese don't reflect light.
They're not metallic.
And he also notices they're going really fast. He doesn't know how fast yet, but he notices they're going super fast. So World War II had just ended, so it's 1947. So Arnold, being a reasonable guy, thinks that this might be, some kind of new type of fighter jet that a military base is testing. And he starts looking at the planes because he's interested, or the flying machines, and he notices that there's no tail. No tail of the plane.
Makes no sense.
So
they couldn't have had that technology at the time.
No, of course not. So he's looking at these flying machines, and they're going towards Mount Rainier, the mountain that he's passing.
Rainier.
And he's getting and bear in mind, Arnold is flying towards them right now because he's curious. He wants to see what's going on. So as he's getting closer, he notices that they're kind of dark, like dark gray, and they're flying, and they're pretty distinct, flying against the white snowfield covering the mountain. But, they're occasionally giving off flashes from the sun.
Remember, it's in the afternoon,
It's like 3 o'clock right now.
Daytime. You're sort of imagining, seeing, flashing lights in a dark sky, but no, this is broad daylight.
And so right now, Arnold is flying. So Arnold decides to fly a little bit above them. And so he gets an overview of these objects, and right now he's like 10,000 feet away.
Wow. So 10,000 feet is what, like 2 miles?
I have no idea.
Yeah, 5,000 feet is a mile.
He's like 2 miles away. So he's flying above them, and he sees that they're extremely thin and flat. And then, eventually they turn, so he sees their edges. And then he says they become almost invisible, but not really. Like, almost like looking at a piece of paper sideways.
Okay.
And so Arnold goes on later to describe them as a series of objects with convex shapes. He likened their movement to rocks, flattened rocks skipping over water. So, John, where are we at?
He also sort of likened the shapes of the disc's objects to like a saucer, a pie pan, or a half moon.
Yeah, fucking frying pan.
Generally just a convex and thin, essentially, appearance. At one point, Arnold said that they flew behind a sub-peak of Mount Rainier and briefly disappeared out of his viewpoint. So they fly around Mount Rainier and they sort of get out of his viewpoint. Knowing his position and the position of the unspecified sub-peak, Arnold placed their distance as they flew past Rainier at about 23 miles away from him.
So he's not 2 miles, he's about 23 miles.
23 miles. By comparing the 9 objects to the distant commercial airline around him, Arnold estimated their angular size as slightly smaller than the DC-4.
Which is the commercial plane that's near him.
Yeah. It was smaller than that, but about the width between the outer engines, which is about 60 feet. So
it's big.
Yeah. Arnold also said he realized that the objects would have to be quite large to see any details at the distance he was at from them. 10 days later from this, he would compare notes with the United Airlines crew that had a similar sighting to what he was experiencing. Together, they placed the size of the objects as larger than the commercial airline, the DC-4. Later, the Air Force analysts would estimate that the actual size of the objects would have had to have been about 140 to 280 feet wide, based upon Arnold's description.
And just to clarify, the Air Force becomes involved in this later. So
Obviously.
Arnold would give this report, and the Air Force take it seriously. So later, they would establish that it was actually quite bigger.
So Arnold said the objects were grouped together. All 9 objects, kind of in a diagonally stepped down, almost echelon formation. They were kind of flying side by side, like purposefully.
That's what echelon means?
Yeah. The objects were stretched out over a distance that he later would calculate to be about 5 miles. Though moving on a more or less horizontal plane, Arnold said that the objects weaved from side to side like the tail of a Chinese kite, almost catching the breeze, darting through the valleys and around smaller peaks. They would occasionally flip or bank on their edges in unison as they turned or maneuvered, causing almost blindingly bright or mirror-like flashes of light. I have to guess reflections.
Yeah.
The encounter gave him an eerie feeling, just sort of like a general sense of unease.
Yeah.
But he suspected that he was just seeing test flights of some new U.S. military aircraft he wasn't privy to.
Yeah, that seems reasonable at the time. Like, he's a guy in 1947.
Yeah,
so Arnold is watching this. He's taking detailed notes as he's kind of observing these 9 objects in his plane. And as the objects passed the mountain, Arnold turned his plane south on a more or less parallel course to the objects. It was at this point that he opened his other window and began observing the objects out of the left side of his plane, unobstructed for the first time by any glass that might have produced reflections. Now, with Arnold's new view, he noticed the objects did not disappear and continued to move very rapidly southward, continuously. So they didn't disappear when he rolled down his window, so it's not just light.
No.
They were continuously moving forward of his position. He began to wonder what their speed was, because they just weren't moving like anything that he had ever seen. So he began to time their rate of passage, and also started calculating their movements. He said that they moved about a 50-mile distance from Mount Rainier to the nearby Mount Adams, because bear in mind, this guy knows his geography, in about 1 minute and 42 seconds. This was according to his very precise clocks on his airplane instrument panel. When he later had time to do the calculation, he found that speed, in order to reach from one mountain to the other in 1 minute and 42 seconds, had to be no less than 1,700 miles an hour.
Holy shit.
Which was about 3 times faster than any manned aircraft could fly in 1947. That was a speed that was far technologically superior to anything that could happen.
You know, this is a time when soldiers are getting home from the war. They're impregnating their wives. Their busty, wholesome wives have been waiting for them.
Exactly.
And now these men have come home to give them seed.
He was not one of these men.
No, but this is just context for the generation, you know?
The greatest generation.
Yeah, and so baby boomers, some of you listeners might have them in your family tree somewhere. So anyway, go on, Ben. What happened next?
Okay, so Arnold wanted to be conservative about this while he was making his calculations. So what he did was he decided that 1,700 miles an hour was just too
Fucking fast.
insane. Yeah, too fucking fast for him to reasonably estimate. So he decided to round this down to 1,200 miles an hour, which was still
Fucking
far
fast.
faster than any aircraft that existed at the time, because it was beyond supersonic speed, and the supersonic sound barrier had yet to be broken. So naturally, Arnold eventually lands at the airport. It's 4 p.m. It's about an hour after he's seen these objects. And he
He's
knows,
like, holy shit! I
yeah,
just saw some
he
shit.
knows the airport general manager. It's his good buddy by the name of Al Baxter, and he tells this guy the entire story. And then eventually, so he's telling Baxter the entire story, and at first Baxter doesn't believe him. But he tells a bunch of the other, staff people at the airport, and they're like, holy, because he's trying to figure out what
He's
it
like,
was.
hey guys, hang on. I've flown a bunch of fucking times in my life.
Yeah, and I just
Something was
well. I
amiss.
think he's looking for like information more than
Yeah.
anything. Like, you guys know what this is. So,
You guys see that?
but Arnold's a busy guy. He doesn't have time to sit and lament. So he has an air show to go to in Pendleton, Oregon, and takes off. But little known to, actually unknown to him at the time, word was beginning to spread. The staff of the airport he had just left actually called other airports to ask if they had seen anything, because fucking Kenneth Arnold was a respected dude. When he
Yeah, people like this guy.
When he said something, people fucking listened. So they were like, wait a minute, if he doesn't know what it is, let's try and figure it out. So it was during the flight to Pendleton, Oregon, that Arnold decided to really get an in-depth study of the maps. And he actually had, scientific experience, and he determined that the distance between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, the two mountains that he had seen the objects fly between, and he calculated the distance between them, and he calculated how fast they must have been going.
Doing a bunch of fucking math.
And he just couldn't, and the 1,700 miles per hour came up again. He couldn't fucking shake 70.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so he lands again.
Curses!
He lands again, and he gets together in a kind of, I guess, like a luxury lounge with a bunch of other pilots that he's hanging out with, and he tells them all the story. And all of the pilots there are like, you should probably contact Air Force Intelligence about this.
Let them know.
And so he does. And Arnold expects them just to blow him off, like to be like, yeah, this isn't any big deal. But
they don't.
But to his surprise, the Air Force Intelligence Office immediately gets back to him, and he expects them to simply, dismiss his account.
Off.
Instead, what they do is they take hours on the phone with him, and they take his story extremely seriously. So this is the Air Force Intelligence that he's now talking to. And they suggest, they don't say, but they suggest that he might have seen guided missiles or some sort of new technology. But Arnold tells them to their face that he doesn't think this explanation is adequate. And,
but I think the big thing to take away from this, though, is that, in 1947, before a lot of the technology we have that has sort of evolved and seen things and discovered things, our satellites, our our outer spacecraft, these guys took him dead serious.
Yeah,
they were like, hang on, no, tell us exactly what you fucking saw.
Yeah, World War II.
Almost as if they had sort of other stories along a timeline that they wanted to corroborate.
Well, John,
right?
it's funny you say that. So soon after that,
and again, this is an episode Ben set up these notes.
So it's funny he says that, though, because soon after that, a couple Air Force buddies of his who were actually pilots in World War II told Arnold that they had actually been briefed before going into combat on multiple missions that they might run into aircraft that they couldn't, oddly shaped aircraft that were neither friend nor foe. And the Air Force Army Command told them that these were simply called Foo Fighters, and if they see oddly shaped aircraft. They should just ignore them if they don't appear to be blatantly Nazi or Japanese planes. And they also told Arnold specifically that they should not think he is going crazy. So, years later, just like a little side note, it was actually declassified by the military that the term foo fighter, not food, F-O-O, was in fact used by Allied aircraft pilots in World War II to describe various UFOs or unidentified flying objects. To describe various objects seen over both the European and Pacific theaters of operation. Arnold found this odd, obviously, but he wasn't willing to, uproot his life to go down this rabbit hole. But very quickly, word started to spread around the country. So, Arnold, without really trying, becomes somewhat of a national celebrity. Like, reporters get wind of this story. People want
to suck his dick.
Yeah, people at the various airports are asking about him.
Agencies.
So just the day after the sighting, reporters are hounding for him. Eventually, he's invited to the office of the East Oregonian, which is a very prestigious newspaper at the time. And
in Oregon.
He's interviewed by multiple reporters who claim that he's lying. But, according to witnesses and the reporters themselves, their doubts quickly evaporated when they interviewed Arnold at length. And as historian Mike Dash records, Arnold had the markings of a reliable witness. He was a respected businessman and experienced pilot. And he seemed to be neither exaggerating what he had seen or adding sensational details to his report. He also gave the impression of being a careful observer. These details impressed the newspapermen who interviewed him and lent credibility to his report.
So Arnold would actually soon kind of complain about the effects of publicity on his life. On June 27th, he was reported saying, "I haven't had a moment of peace since I was first told the story."
Didn't like being famous.
Yeah, since he first told it. Then he said a preacher had called and told him that the objects he saw were harbingers of doomsday. Quote, harbingers of doomsday. And that the preacher was preparing his congregation, quote, for the end of the world, end quote. So the United crew seems the same thing 10 days later.
Kenneth
the next segment.
Real quick?
I got it. Go ahead.
So Kenneth Arnold is dealing with lunatics for the first time in his life, and as a competent businessman, he doesn't like
Doesn't know how to deal with it.
He doesn't want to deal with doomsday preachers. Okay, folks, so quick recap. Right now, what we have Kenneth Arnold, a respected businessman and seasoned pilot who has, to his shock, witnessed 9 strange objects going about 1,700 miles an hour.
Fast as fuck.
9 objects horizontally flying in a weird formation, and he doesn't know what to make of it. So immediately after landing, after his trip, he tells people about this. The people knowing Kenneth Arnold know he's not lying, and they suggest he reports it to the Air Force. He does that. The Air Force, to his surprise, takes him extremely seriously.
They don't fuck around.
And so Arnold is now famous after witnessing this, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it. It's interrupting business. Everything is fucking.
His life's kind of. It's
and
not
so,
what he wanted.
Yeah. So he
didn't want to see aliens.
So what happens next is people start to get in touch with him, cooperating his story. John.
A United Airlines crew over Idaho en route to Seattle also spotted 5 to 9 disc-like objects that paced their plane for 10 to 15 minutes before suddenly just disappearing. The next day in Seattle, Arnold met with that pilot, Captain Emil J. Smith, and compared the sighting details. Sort of just like, look, what do you got? What do I got? The main difference in in shape was that the United crew thought the objects appeared rougher on the top, like jagged.
Kenneth Arnold was 25 miles away.
Crew. This was one of the few sightings that Arnold actually felt was reliable. Most of the rest he thought were just kind of public seeing and other things, possibly acid heads and druggies.
Yeah, so people have been getting in touch with them, saying that they had seen the same thing, but he thought most of it was just
bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. So keep going.
So Arnold and Captain Smith would become friends. They met again with the Army Air Force intelligence officers on July 12th of that year and filed sighting reports. Then they teamed up again at the end of July in investigating the strange Maury Island incident, which allegedly involved a UFO dropping lava on a harbor patrolman's boat and threats from a mysterious man in dark suits, another soon-to-become Drunk Mysteries podcast. Another topic for another time. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so from there, things only got stranger. Soon, a similar sighting of 8 objects also occurred over Tulsa, Oklahoma on July 12, 1947. In this particular instance, a photo was taken and published in the Tulsa Daily World of the 8 circular-ish objects on July 13th, the day after the sighting. But suspiciously, the photographer, a man by the name of Enlo Gilmore, said that in the blow-ups of the photo, the objects resembled a baseball catcher's mitt.
Or flying wings. Or two opposite objects.
Not opposite, but definitely not similar. So he was of the opinion that the military had a secret fleet of flying wing airplanes. So a flying wing airplane would be like a stealth bomber. You've all seen one of those.
Don't all airplanes fly and have wings?
No, but these would just be okay, so the term flying wing, John, is actually a plane without any tail. So it's just like a flying wing. So he has his opinion, he tells people, and then he meets a guy who's a gunnery officer in the Navy during the war. And this guy tells him that, he knew that they actually did have flying wings, blah, blah, blah. It goes on for a while. So Arnold comes down, he interviews these people, and Arnold asks the photographer what they looked like. And the most notable thing that the photographer tells him is that one of the objects seemed to have a hole in the middle. Now, Kenneth Arnold also had noticed a hole in the middle of one of the objects that he saw his initial day. So 2 or 3 photos of similar solitary objects were taken by another person, William Rhodes, over Phoenix, Arizona.
And this is all sort of happening in a July. General area.
In July.
Also in a general area of the continent, of the globe.
Yeah, in a general area. So in basically the fucking west of America, you're getting strange sightings of flying objects. Mm-hmm. So this guy, William Rhodes, in Phoenix on July 7, 1947, took pictures of something equally mysterious and sent it to a bunch of newspapers. The object in the pictures, we're looking at it right now, actually, it's rounded, it's dark, and it's a rounded front and a crescent back. And these photos also seem to be showing something resembling a hole in the middle. You can Google.
We'll link to it on our site.
You can Google these. So Rhodes thought it was some sort of flying canopy, but his negative prints. Actually, this is one of the most interesting parts. So
break it down.
After these were published in newspapers, the FBI knocked on William Rhodes' door and actually confiscated all of his original negative prints. However, the photos were later released, years later, over a decade later, in military reports that were given to officers.
So this is just a regular guy, just a newspaper photographer, William Rhodes, who just happened upon something strange in the sky and had his camera on his hip. He takes some photos. He thinks they might be relevant. This is before Big Brother is watching every move, before technology is really to the point where you can imagine the craziest things. These guys didn't have the internet. They didn't have Twitter.com or YouTube or the Instagrams. So this guy just sees some fucking shit in the skies and gives it to the newspaper because he says, hey, maybe the local townsfolk in my town in 1947 will want to see this. Now, the next fucking day, FBI agencies, seemingly imposing authority figures, descend from all angles upon his house in the morning. He's in his bathrobe. He's having coffee. Waffles just sprung from the toaster like Eggo waffles. He can smell syrup. A busty lady that had stayed over the night before because he was out, on an investigative beat and he's running a cover. And she was staying over. And so then the FBI shows up. So he's definitely looks intense. And they confiscate the negatives to these particular photographs that he took of strange objects in the sky. Now you have to wonder, my dear listeners, what exactly were they after? What exactly did they know that thought that these negatives could be a compromise to national security, a compromise to just the status quo and way of life and well-being of life for the American public?
Yeah.
Right. So go on. What happens next?
So eventually, Kenneth Arnold starts to suspect that the unsuspectable might be at play. So on July 7th, 1947, two very large, high-profile stories came out where Arnold raised the topic because Arnold has started to get interviewed by local reporters. So Arnold raises the topic of the objects to reporters possibly being of extraterrestrial origin.
He finally says
now, both as his opinion and various people who had written to him have said that this could be a possibility. In an Associated Press story, Arnold said that he had received large quantities of fan and expert mail that was eager to help him solve the mystery. None of it, however, was accusing him of being insane and, most importantly to his mind, lying. Now, like the earlier doomsday preacher Arnold spoke of, many of the writers place religious interpretation on this sighting. Arnold, however, thought this was insane. But the writers that he did listen to said that they suggested the discs were either some sort of military aircraft or visitations from another world. Now, Arnold added that he had purchased a movie camera, which he would now take with him on every single flight that he went on from here forth, hoping to obtain photographic proof of what he had seen. Now, a Chicago Times article, the most
serious newspaper.
Yep, the most prestigious article in the world at the time, stated with saying, quote, Kenneth Lewis Arnold is not so certain that the strange contraptions are made on this planet. Arnold said that he hoped the devices were really the work of the U.S. Army, but he told this newspaper in a phone interview, if our government, quote, knows anything that these devices have to do with, the people should be told at once. A lot of people out there are very much disturbed. Some think these things may be from another planet, but they aren't harming anyone, and I think it would be wrong to shoot one of them down, even if it can be done. Their high speed would completely wreck them should they crash. The Chicago Times went on to say that they thought Arnold was of the most astute and honorable nature, and they doubted that he was a liar. The man seemed like he was a straight shooter. So anyway, they go on to say this. They go on to say yada yada yada. He's a good dude. We don't think he's lying. He seems sane. He's got a successful business.
All's cool.
He doesn't like being famous, so he has no reason to do this for publicity. He's well to do with money. So John, what did the Associated Press have to say about this?
They said in the story from July 19th of that year that Arnold reiterated his belief that if they weren't the Army, then these objects must have been extraterrestrial. He stated how these discs were not from any foreign country. The Army could give the answer if they would. Quote, if they don't have the explanation now, they certainly could do something to find out, end quote. If the Army has no explanations for the discs, quote, I know this sounds crazy, they must be from another planet. End quote. That's Arnold talking. Basically, the Army doesn't know what the fuck these things are. They can find out. And the Army doesn't know what the fuck these things are. They're from another planet.
John, do you want to know what the Army did after this?
Where'd it go?
They stepped in.
Holy shit.
So what happened next is that the Air Force decided to believe it or not, the Air Force decided to begin a very widespread investigation of Arnold's claims. And the person assigned to the case was none other than Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain William Davison of the Hamilton Army Airfield in California. They interviewed Kenneth Arnold on July 12th. Now, Arnold submitted a written report to them before the interview and actually stood in for an in-person interview and they regarded, and then they quoted after both interviews about Arnold's reliability. They concluded, quote, "It is the present opinion of the interviewer that Mr. Arnold actually saw what he stated. It is difficult to believe that a man of his character and apparent integrity would state that he saw objects and write up a report to this extent that he did not actually see."
Basically, this guy wasn't a drug-using hippie in the late 40s.
Yeah,
he wasn't a fucking like government, crackpot
he has
theorist.
no motive to do this.
No.
Like, it's taking time away from his life. So, little did Arnold know at the time, though, John, that on July 9th, 1947, Air Force Intelligence, with help from the FBI,
Holy shit.
secretly began
getting
investigating UFO sightings, with Arnold sighting at the core of their investigation. And
It all stems from him almost.
exactly.
You know?
So 3 weeks after they began the investigation, they came to the conclusion that the saucer reports from Arnold and various others were not imaginary or adequately explained by natural phenomena. Something real was flying around. This
Not a coincidence.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence. This is actually from the military. So this later laid the groundwork for another intelligence estimate. On September. Just in September. No particular date in September.
Yeah, we don't know. Research.
1947, renowned General Nathan Twining, the commanding officer of the Air Material Command, which likewise concluded that the saucers that had been seen by multiple notable witnesses were real, and they urged a formal investigation by multiple government agencies.
This, in turn, resulted in the formation of a top-secret program called the Project Sign at the end of 1947. The first publicly acknowledged U.S. Air Force UFO investigation. Project Sign eventually evolved into Project Grudge, and then better known as Project Blue Book. Or as I like to say, blue balls, am I right? The personnel of the U.S. Air Force Project Sign, which went from 1947 until 1949 until it became Grudge, they studied Arnold's story. According to the director of Project Grudge and later Project Blue Ball/Book, Major Edward J. Ruppelt, quote, "I found that there was a lot of speculation on this report. Two factions joined up behind two lines of reasoning. One side said that Arnold had seen plain, everyday jet planes flying in formation. The other side didn't buy this idea at all. They based their argument on the fact that Arnold knew where the objects were when he timed them. There was an old theory that maybe Arnold had seen wind whipping snow along the mountain ridges. So I asked Air Force investigators about this. I got a flat impossible." Folks, that concludes the notes and research that we have for this topic.
Okay, so John, here's what I'm going to go ahead and say. Like, bear in mind, this led to multiple Air Force investigations.
This is the beginning of all UFO speculation.
Oh,
really,
yeah, and
right?
by the way, this isn't only the beginning of that, but this is the
public's
first
consciousness.
time in U.S. history that a government agency, multiple government agencies, the United States Air Force and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, admit to the existence of things, that's all we can really call them, things flying in the sky that they cannot explain the origins of. Now, John,
defend against.
Now, John, recently there was a widely released press release from the Air Force that said, in this year, when we record this, in 2018, that they do in fact acknowledge the existence of things that fly around in the sky that they can't explain. So, I think that Kenneth Arnold saw something that, I don't know if it was an alien, I don't know if it wasn't, but all I know is that I don't think it was of U.S. origin, and I don't know how to explain it. What do you think?
I think you would be foolish to think that in the vast cosmos of the universe and space and galaxy that we are alone.
Yeah, I know, but do you think it was aliens that were coming and visiting Earth?
Do you want me to get to my point? The point was that obviously that would be foolish. So do I think that Kenneth was being truthful? Absolutely. Again, we've established his credibility. Like
Yeah.
we have to apply this sort of theorizing of otherworldliness the same as we would like a criminal case or somebody you know having to prove it in court. Like the
Now,
evidence.
I don't doubt Kenneth Arnold's authenticity. I want to know what you think they are.
They're fucking things from another planet.
You think so, though?
Absolutely, of course.
Okay.
I think we know that this rock has existed for fucking countless fucking years. A long goddamn time. Longer exponentially to the millionth degree longer than we will live. So to think that combined with the theory that there isn't life out there beyond us, of course we've been discovered. Of course we've been scouted and people are aware and possibly acutely monitoring our existence as a species. And I think this sighting was just one of many that we will eventually have the instrumentation and technology to document ourselves. Ben, go on.
So, John, let's have a discussion about
Yeah.
this for a second. So I think that there could be many explanations as to what Kenneth Arnold was citing, but I do think there is a clear chain throughout American
there's a through
throughout
line.
American history of people seeing weird stuff in the sky. And you know what I think it could be? I think it could be anything from interdimensional activity. Like, let's put it this way: like,
Timelines.
what if there's a fourth dimensional being that can travel across time and space?
Manipulate.
Yeah, or just like walk across time, like we would walk across the street, and they can come into our time, dip in their things, and dip out. Like, I just don't know. Maybe we're sharing the Earth with another intelligent species that lives far beneath the crust.
Invisible. A Godzilla.
Some sort of mole person.
Muto.
But
Anyway, I think that's all the notes we have. That's all.
Yeah, I
the
know, but let's try to
research-
get to the bottom of
Yeah,
this.
well, okay. Well, I think. Look, I don't necessarily know that we're going to solve the mysteries
yes,
of
we are. We're going to do it
in-
right here, right now. But you know what I
know.
need you to do? I need you to have faith. I need you.
What do you got to say, Ben?
Okay,
Tell
John,
me.
so I have a question.
Go ahead.
On a scale from 1 to 10, I'm going to give you a list of 3 options.
Sure.
The first one is, I'm going to give you a scale, on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being least true, 10 being entirely true.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a list of options as to where these things might have come from.
Sure.
And now, I want you to rate the questions that I proposed to you.
Just give me
based
the
on that scale.
options.
Okay, option number 1. It was the Russians.
2% based on this description.
Scale 2. Okay,
2. Based on the description, like 2. I mean,
Okay,
like
next
maybe.
question. And the other one, it was people who are somehow okay. So
A
aliens.
1947's Tony Stark sort of character has private flashing things in the sky. Your likelihood, 1 out of 10.
0.
Yeah, okay, agreed. Go on.
I think it was either interdimensional beings of some kind, or possibly psychedelic creatures that have come to us from our own minds to tell us some sort of fundamental truth. John,
Now,
your
what do you
thoughts?
think? Okay, so like that's not impossible. You know, obviously this is around a time when people are experimenting with a lot of acid, a lot of drugs. We sort of stopped experimenting with in recent times. But the point being, or I guess what I'm saying
Speak
is,
for yourself.
well, as a government, I guess was what I mean. I don't think our government's really doing acid tests anymore.
I hope.
But they were at one point, and I think it's possible that Kenneth Arnold was untoldly experimenting with these psychedelics and potentially just wanted to express himself flying around.
I disagree. Here's why.
Probably.
I disagree.
Of course you do.
Now, you and I have both dealt with people on psychedelics.
True.
You and I have both done psychedelics.
Ben, look, I know where you're going with this. You asked me to speculate wildly. I'm speculating wild.
John, you're better than that. We both know you're better than that.
Okay.
But anyway, folks, I want you to think.
No, I guess maybe what about, okay, let's talk about now about Kenneth Arnold. I'm going to speculate wildly for a second. What about the other flight crew? What if they were a bunch of just sort of hippie types on acid? And it's mere coincidence that they also sort of saw flashing lights in the sky and, you know, maybe it's not possible it was aliens. Ben, what do you think?
John, you know by training, I am a detective. And not by
Agreed.
training, but by by default, I'm a detective kind of guy, and I'm
You
not
can
lazy.
smell crime.
I can smell crime, and I don't believe in coincidences. I do not think for a second that a highly trained United flight crew was able to take off with on the acid. I think that whatever they saw was, in fact, the exact same thing that Kenneth Arnold saw. You know who else thinks that's true?
The FBI.
The Air Force as well.
Yeah.
So
The
I mean,
authorities.
so folks, let's just think about the facts for a second. We have governmental agencies, astute businessmen, and a flight crew of the world-class company known as United, who talks way too fucking long on their pre-flight announcements.
Agreed. Holy hell.
Yeah, it's like listening to.
Ugh.
It's like radio. You listen. It doesn't matter. But so you have all these competent people who agree that there was something strange in the sky on that day, and then you have a bunch of reporters and amateur photographers who took pictures of said strange objects flying in the sky in that month on the same year that this all happened. So here's what I think. I think that we have something that is not of this government, the American government, flying around the skies of the United States of America, where you and I live. I mean, I was not even sperm in my dad's balls when this happened.
My father was just being born.
Okay, you see, I wasn't cum yet. You were cum, and that's the difference between you and me.
Generational gap.
Yep.
Look, anyway, I think that look, this is not going to be the last time that this podcast discusses extraterrestrial existence, life, sightings, anything. So I'm going to leave it at that. Like, the story is yet untold because, frankly, like we said, this is, Kenneth Arnold is the godfather of UFO sightings. That means that there's a progenitus, there's a bloodline. There is more to tell of this tale.
Do you
and this
think
is
the
only
Arnold
the
family-
beginning of this podcast. Go ahead.
Do you think the Arnold family is still fucking? Do you think they still have inside info?
Maybe. Anyway, I think that's all the time we have for this first edition. Probably the first time we talk about aliens
Not
on this
the last.
podcast. Certainly not the last. So this has been the Drunk Mysteries. I want to thank our producer Rick Warren and our sound intern Dan Burton. Our sources have basically just been
And
Wikipedia.
our roommate Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie was in the mix also. That was super helpful. Anyway, if you're listening to the podcast, please in iTunes subscribe and review to the podcast. It really fucking helps us. Like, you have no idea. We don't make a lot of money of this. Our research.
We don't make any money.
Yeah,
with this.
our investigative sources are already running thin. So please subscribe and review in iTunes. Just it can say hand job.
$0.
It doesn't matter.
We don't want to make money.
No.
You know what we want to do?
Tell the truth.
Yeah.
Expose the truth. Anyway, so yeah, go into iTunes, subscribe and review. That's all I got. Ben, you got anything else? Take us out.
I have nothing.
Okay, so Ben's got nothing. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Drunk Mysteries.